You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the big show. As always, when the Iron Lady sings it, that makes it official, and we're officially live on the Chris Voss Show. Thanks to my audience for tuning in. You know, for 15 years, we've been bringing you the smartest people, the CEOs, the billionaires, the White House presidential advisors, governors, Congress members, you name it, U.S. ambassadors, astronauts, Pulitzer Prize winners, the most brilliant people. They write the books. They spend tens of thousands of hours doing their research, sometimes a lifetime, collecting their stories. And as we always say on the Chris Voss Show, stories are the owner's manual to life. And if you don't learn something from every show that we have, I mean, we just have these shows where even I, for all the knowledge we collected and thousands of guests that I've interviewed, learn. I mean, we have these epiphanies where I'm like, holy crap, you made me look at that in a whole different light and angle. And so hopefully you're getting that on the Chris Voss Show. And if not, just go back and listen to every podcast until you get it. Or for the show to your family, friends, and relatives, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the Tickety Talkity, and Chris Voss Facebook.com. We have another amazing gentleman and author on the show. He's the author of the newest book that has come out. Hit that. On the Origin of Artificial Species. Came out November 3rd, 2023. David R. Wood joins us on the show, and he'll be talking about his latest book and his journey through life. He is the founder and CEO of RSG Federal. He possesses over 20 years of professional experience supporting U.S. government agencies, including all DoD branches, the Pentagon, USCG, and HHS. Utilizing a versatile skill set, he consistently delivers breakthrough results in support of enterprise transformation efforts. This includes leading the design, tailoring, and implementation of industry best practice frameworks, and to uniquely suit agency enterprise strategies and objectives. In addition, he's a former United States Army enlisted soldier and commissioned officer with infantry and signal branch qualifications. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, sir.
It's an honor to have you as well, sir. Thank you for your service. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
On the interwebs, at rsgfederal.com, and then on LinkedIn. We also just starting up a YouTube channel and a Twitter under DRW_ArtEvol, Art for Artificial Evolution.
There you go. So we're going to be talking about AI on the show. Is that what we're up to? Or what is artificial species?
Yes. So we're here to talk about, artificial intelligence is a result of my research and the discovery that I've made, but we're actually here to talk about, bottom line up front, I accidentally discovered a second pattern of evolution.
There you go. Probably explains. Is this the one that explains my weird relatives? No, I'm just kidding.
No. I don't know. I can't speak for them. No.
I have to see them at Christmas. So give us a 30,000 overview of your book on the origin of artificial species.
Sure. So 30,000 foot, there's a pattern that Charles Darwin discovered that he published in 1859. That is actually a conceptual pattern that describes the invisible way that you can't see with the naked eye. It has to be seen, as Plato says, in the mind's eye, in order to understand how evolution, how billions of years of evolutionary competition has unfolded. The key mechanism he discovered was that of natural selection. It's basically self-sorting. It's a very simple concept. The NBA playoffs, the NFL playoffs, all of our playoffs are all based on that mechanism. It's an artificial variation of natural selection. The scoreboard dictates who lives and who dies. Same thing in evolution.
So this is where when I see those TikTok videos of people jumping off of stuff and it doesn't turn out well, is that part of it?
Oh, that's part of it, because I always joked around ever since I was a kid without realizing. I say never self-select yourself for extinction. That's why. Never
self-select yourself for extinction. I'm going to get that on a shirt or a hat or maybe a tattoo just to remind myself every day.
Yep.
But yeah, you see that all the time on the internet and America's Funniest Home Videos. Never self-select people. Just never do it. But, the great thing is, it used to be that, I remember growing up in an age where we didn't have to put on bridges, don't jump off the bridge. We didn't have to put warning labels on stuff to say maybe don't let the baby play with the plastic. But evidently we've become such an idiot culture that, or there are too many lawyers suing everybody for everything, that I don't know why we have to tell so many people so many things. Like, it just seems obvious to me, but I don't know. Maybe that's the reason I'm still here.
No, and that's actually, you're pointing to actually artificial evolution is the pattern where we create new ideas and new technologies. Mm-hmm. That's what it's been invisible to us because we're on the inside looking out. So what's happening is artificially you can create dumb ideas, right? In nature, she produces adaptations that don't work. Well, they go extinct. And so the same thing happens with cultures, which are artificial species. The same thing happens with like the payphone. Nobody wants it anymore, so it goes extinct. When you stop being artificially selected because the adaptation that we created, a cell phone, a payphone, a communism, it doesn't work. So it goes extinct eventually because eventually natural evolutionary competition will put it out of business. So that's how the two work together. Go ahead, sir.
It sounds like you could apply this to business, governments, you apply this to everything in the world. But, for me, an entrepreneur, and for a lot of people that are entrepreneurs listening and business CEOs, it sounds like this could be used to identify, like when BlackBerry used to dominate the market. Yes. And then was output by iPhones. In your research, did you figure out, is there a way to figure out when you've artificially created something, when it's going to hit the proverbial wall and be moved into extinction?
That's a great question. The same question Darwin asked in natural ecosystems, unfortunately, is very similar in artificial ecosystems. Typically, you can have what they call a condition that you find in nature is the same condition you find in artificial ecosystems like Wall Street. It's chaotic, right? One small thing can cause a chain reaction that can actually cause a business to go out of business. And it's kind of invisible, right? So it's the same thing in natural ecosystems. That's why Darwin said in his book, it's often amazing that you can't quite tell what the cause and effect relationships are up and down the chain. So, but what you can try to do is look for previous patterns in history, right? In his book, Thomas Siebel and Digital Transformation, which is one of the reasons why I reached this conclusion, he says that being an executive, one of the key things you need to be able to do is find patterns in history and be able to map those patterns to what's happening now and therefore explain what's about to happen. Darwin is the same thing with evolution. You try to use past evolutionary history because it's the only game in town. And an asteroid hit the planet once, wiped out all the dinosaurs. And what did the one pattern of evolution combined with laws of physics do? It just repeated itself all over again. When the ice age ended, everything went extinct. What happened? Just happened all over again. So, a lot of what's going on now are actually just variations of previous artificial evolutionary patterns. Kind of like there's something called where everything becomes a crab, eventually evolves to become a crab. Many species will evolve to become a crab because the same competitive and environmental conditions always repeat throughout Earth's history. So that's why. So that's what the research in my book, where in chapter 12, I lay out the artificial evolutionary pattern. I intentionally, in order to help people not have to imagine it like I did, I picked the NFL. I picked Michael Porter's 5 Forces. I picked my ITIL framework, which I'm a master in. I used Sun Tzu, the Art of War. I picked concepts from all the different academic, military, business fields, economic, like Adam Smith, also nations, that you're already familiar with and you can already understand and just map them to evolutionary concepts in Darwin's book.
There you go. It's all math and mapping. Who knew? Yep. There's a semi-famous quote of mine that I always tell that people like. The one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history, and thereby we go round and round. Yep. And that's really the thing, whether it's governments, whether it's empires, whether it's, it seems like you cracked the code on this, on how it works. Now the big thing is if we can somehow make it predictable. Like, I'd like to know when my ride's supposed to get off or when I'm supposed to go instinct. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. It's one of those things. But, what with product, well, let me ask you this. This is what I was thinking about when we were going through that. The one thing you learn in business, and it's actually true in life as well. Not a lot of people echo it through in life. And that's why people listen to the Chris Voss Show, I hope. The one thing is, in business, if you're not constantly improving, if you're not constantly growing, you're dying. You're on a downward spiral. You have to be going up. There's no flat line into business. I've had very few companies and all the times that I can think of them where, we went from like, $3 million in profit one month to just flatline zero in the next month. If we crashed, it was like, negative, whatever. It was never like, just like, meh, it was either up or down. And that's kind of the way businesses work. I mean, you can have bad months or your investment months and stuff like that affect the bottom line. But technically, if your business isn't growing, if you're not adding customers, you're not adding revenue, you're not innovating, and it's a constant problem solving process. And the same is true of life. If you're not growing as a person, reading, that's why all the richest, most powerful people in this world and smartest people in this world, they're constantly reading, they're constantly getting education, they're constantly, Bill Gates, I was watching the other day, he like uses the big expensive Samsung flip phone so he can read more when he's out. And you see him, he'll be on a boat or something, like a small sailboat. He's got a book on him. He's like reading a book. He's just constantly reading. And so, yeah, if you're not improving your life, is that the way to hack the system, to be constantly improving, constantly adapting,
Yes.
constantly eating your own lunch as like people like Apple did with the iPad, where you have to cannibalize yourself and renew yourself. Otherwise, someone else will.
Yes, that's exactly how it works. So effectively, what you're describing is what Darwin called survival of the fittest and the struggle for existence. Now, human beings have to do that as well. We have to, every day you have to show up in the NFL, and you have to, they're always drafting, they're always looking to replace you. The NFL is a great example of an artificial ecosystem that, because it's such fierce competition, mirrors that of natural evolution. Evolution is always looking to replace a species with a better variation of itself. Well, your coach is trying to do that every year when he's drafting players. And Bill Walsh wrote a great book called The Winning Edge, where he said you should cut a player or trade him 2 or 3 years before he starts to lose his edge, right? Before he starts to lose his value. Belichick followed the same ruthless strategy in his, and it conforms to evolutionary theory, because you cannot wait for your opponents to identify and exploit your weaknesses, because you may go, your company, you as a professional may be pushed aside by new professionals with more innovative ideas. You're constantly having, just like in natural evolution, to fight for your place in the artificial ecosystem in which you're operating. Your workplace, your society, your culture, your industry, period. Because there's always somebody, and this goes back to what you're talking about. Every natural species wants to expand. It's a concept in Darwin's book. So do people want. That's why in Dale Carnegie's book, Everybody Has a Feeling of Importance. Everybody wants to socially expand, because that ensures their survival. It's actually based on an evolutionary concept. And Plato writes about it. He's the one who cracked the code, by the way. Plato and Aristotle are evolutionary scientists. I decoded in my book in chapters 9 and 10, I decode the ancient Greeks. They were completely mistranslated. Plato talks about it, about how every nation wants to expand, where Socrates and him go back and forth. And Socrates goes, so there'll be war then. And Plato goes, yep.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it is. There's scarce resources. It's like that in industries, just like it is in natural. There's only so many consumers, so many eyeballs for social media. There's only so many consumers of a product or service. So we basically, it literally are artificially created an artificial variation of the exact same process. So it's artificial evolutionary theory, but it's actually the same. And
there you go.
If you understand the natural evolutionary concepts and you understand how they apply to human activity, it kind of takes away the mystery of what's going on. So yeah, you're in the survival of the fittest. Like, for example, one of the things they see on the internet nowadays is, men have to compete in order to be selected by women in competition. Why? Because they're looking to survive too, and you have to be the fittest. If you start losing your edge, that's why a lot of women actually move on from men, is because it's actually an evolutionary instinct, and it's irrational. You can't argue with evolution. So all you can do is do a lot of, they call it leveling up. It's literally just make yourself more competitive, make yourself fittest option for a woman. I mean, it's just evolutionary theory, cut and dry.
Yeah, you brought me to the point I was going to go to. I've been single for 35 years and dated all my life. I've seen changes in the dating market and expectations for men. And yeah, I'll talk to people and I'll be like, life isn't fair. The universe isn't fair. There's no equality in the universe. There's complementary nature in the universe, but there's no equality in the universe. It's not the way the universe works. The universe is not fair. And I'll tell people, the universe is a survival game. That's what you're living, is a survival game. Survival of the fittest. You're crying and bitching and whining about how, it's not working out for you. it's survival of the fittest. If it's not working out for you, and to your point of what you really document in your book is, it really is. So you better wise up. Now, the one thing is women control access to sex, but men control access to marriage. So there actually is a qualification the other side for women that women have to qualify as well. Yes. So there's that, and it's important that men recognize that, because it seems like a lot of men don't just seem to be servile these days. If I hear happy life one more time, I'm going to punch somebody in the face.
No, I'm with you. I just remember the show Rome, which is one, because I love Roman history, and it's a woman who says it best, actually, the woman Atia, where she forces her daughter to divorce her husband because she wants to marry her to Pompey as a strategic alliance, and the husband starts to cry, and she just goes, "A weak man? Oh, that's of no use to anybody."
There you go.
And that's the Darwinian thinking. I mean, survival of the fittest.
Yeah. The data right now shows that of divorces that are filed, 90% are filed by women that are educated, and 80% that are non-educated. So they're filing most of the divorces. And people, guys are like, well, why is this going on? Is because, well, women are hypergamous by nature, but it's all about the propagation of the species. It's about competition for resources, like you've talked about in your book. And, we all do everything we can to survive and breed. I mean, that's really our paradigm. And people hate that. They go, "Oh, that sounds so base and crass and very caveman-like." But yeah, we're really caveman-like when it comes down to it. To fall back to something you talked about that was kind of interesting, though, is you've studied the NFL, or base your models. You use the examples of the NFL as your models. You mentioned Bill Belichick. One thing that's interesting is he's on the fence now for his job. Mm-hmm. And both him and, I think, two good examples are him trying to do what you said, do that, get rid of Brady 2 years before maybe it was going to round out, so they could start the curve of bringing up another quarterback. I believe the Packers have tried to do that with different things. But another example is, who's the guy who went to Denver from the Indiana Colts?
Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning. Yeah. Both those cases, those guys went on to win one or two Super Bowls and after they left. And so they may have jumped too quick. And now Belichick is on the fence, from my understanding, or that's what the rumors are.
But I'm a Patriots fan. I know all about it. I watched. It's been a rough season for the first time.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, there's, on one hand, you're trying to put your thumb on the scale and use the model that you have, but on the other hand, it may backfire. Maybe.
Yeah.
What's the outlook on that?
No, you're heading in the right direction, sir. My father and I have talked at length, because he copy-edited the book, so he knows all about this stuff, and we were applying it ourselves, right? As we made the discovery of the second pattern of evolution, I wanted to make it practical and applicable to everybody in every walk of life. Basically, what's happened is this is I actually use this in the book. It's written in there about what happened in the NFL. The NFL, since the 1980s, has decided, like basketball, scoring gets more fans in the seats. Also, which is a good thing for the expansion of revenue, women have become more interested in the sport. Well, everyone likes scoring, and women don't tend to like just brutal violence and men just beating the crap out of each other all the time. So the NFL has realized we can expand our revenue and our viewer base. Plus, if you look at concussions, it's a rational, humane, and moral thing to do to not put these people at risk of destroying their minds for the rest of their life. So all of these things have created a confluence where the best coaches now, I keep telling my dad, I'd rather have Sean McVay at this point than Bill Belichick going forward, because it's all about offense, like Kyle Shanahan types. Belichick is great on defense. Unfortunately for him, he hasn't gotten any worse. That's what people fail to understand. The league has artificially evolved away from his skill set. He can keep it down to 10, but that's not good enough to keep a team to, a limit of 10. If you can't score points yourself, it's all about creativity and innovation, like a Shanahan with his offense, and taking quarterbacks and position them to be more successful, like Shanahan has done. So it's not that Belichick has gotten any worse. What really is he tried last year with a new offense to artificially adapt, right? He tried to come up with a new set of adaptations for his offense. He was unable to make the transition, and he also had a quarterback that really, Mac Jones, just doesn't have the arm strength and the skill set, right? He's just not really a pro quarterback. He's limited in what you can do with a playbook. So really, the problem with Belichick is he needs a better quarterback, because he can still keep you down to a reasonable amount of points, make you kick field goals and get turnovers. However, it's now scoring in the end that matters most in the NFL. And that's why it's not that he's failed. It's that he keeps drafting for the past, right? He keeps on trying. Special teams is now being degraded too, with the kickoff being degraded. So all the things that Belichick learned from the 1970s through, his game plan in 1991 at the Super Bowl is in the Hall of Fame because it was so innovative, right? But now the NFL now favors offense over defense for economic reasons, and so therefore it actually favors Andy Reid now. It doesn't favor a Bill Belichick. It's not Belichick's fault. It's just life, and if you can't adapt. Just like in natural, it's exactly what you have to do in natural ecosystems. If you cannot adapt to new changes in the ecosystem, like, you have to they changed the rules on interference back with Blount back in the 70s with the Steelers. And then they changed it again after Tad Law and our guys manhandled Peyton Manning's guys in 2003. Now you see smaller and smaller receivers who are more like scat backs, right? Austin Eckler types. And look at the guy Ridley with the Jacksonville. They wouldn't have been able to get free back in the day with the amount of physicality you're allowed to use. So that's really just what it comes to. Belichick has done a good job adapting on defense. He's having trouble adapting on offense. And so that's what the problem is.
There you go.
The wrong guys too. They're
and you mentioned the NFL attracting more women to it. Boy, they're sure pulling that off with the Taylor Swift there.
That's
thing going on.
Huge. Swifties are everywhere. Yeah.
It's like they're taking over the stadiums. Right. So, you bring up an interesting point. I've been a Raiders fan for all my life, and it's sad and pathetic now at this point, the last 20 years, but that's another story. But, one of the things I remember, I was talking with, I can't remember who the guy who won the Super Bowl with the who's the Pirate, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then he spent his last season or two at the Raiders. But I was friends with him for a while. I used to talk privately, and I'm like, this is back where the Raider Al Davis was still alive.
You mean the coach, Sean Gruden?
No, it wasn't. It was the coach. It was the guy who was always in trouble on the Buccaneers, causing trouble.
Oh, okay.
I can see his name in my head, but I can't think of it. But he was fine, and he was a problem maker. Like one time he did a return after doing a touchdown through the whole sideline of the other team just to mock them, stuff like that. I think he one time said some things about the NFL being a racial slavery thing. But he spent his last year or two at the Raiders, and I was talking to her at that time, and I'm like, why is it we're racking up 300 yards and penalties, which cause us to lose games? Why are the Raiders playing ugly offense? And he goes, dude, it's Al Davis. Al Davis won with the models in the 70s of brutal football and cheating and beating and just sheer
balls, just deep shots.
And just in the scrum, punching, clawing, being evil, doing anything to brutal. I mean, that was back in the game where, you were really trying to hurt each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're trying to take that guy out.
People biting each other at the bottom piles and stuff.
I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers guy who's the commentator, I forget his name too. He's had 50 concussions, and you can see it now. But back then it was like, oh, you have a concussion, I just sit down a round or two. But and so I talked to him, and I'm like, this game has changed, and Steelers and the Raiders are still trying to come to fruition of how to play this game and all the adaptions. I mean, Al Davis dying kind of helped because he was just still trying to play 70s football. But you bring up some really good points in adaptation and how businesses can constantly do things, because there's so many great stories like Kodak, holding on to print, even though they had the digital footprint. They were like, no, we can't eat our own lunch. Then there's examples of Apple, who knew when they created the iPad that it was going to kill Mac sales. And they're like, well, if we don't eat our own lunch and cannibalize ourselves, somebody else will.
That's right. So
we might as well be the ones who bring innovation to market. And so it seems like it's a really good model of what you described in your book for innovation. And if you're not innovating, then if you're not growing, you're dying.
Well, it's like they taught me in the military. One sergeant taught me, if you are not moving, you must be improving.
There you go.
That's actually expressing an evolutionary concept, is that everybody else is trying to eat your lunch. And that if you don't self-scout, as they say in sports, and identify your weaknesses in business, especially business and warfare, they're two of the most purely, as long as there's not somebody coming in and kind of restructuring the battlefield for the most part, or the industry, there's not an external force, they will breed the most pure competitive advantages. and those that are becomes like cultures are adaptations, right? It's really just a culture is an accumulation of a society's adaptations, like an artificial species, basically, I talk about in my book, right? Like Rome and Carthage competed as artificial species. Carthage went extinct because the Romans had much better set of artificial adaptations. In fact, they were masters of both natural and artificial evolution, both. It's actually prevalent throughout their entire society and the way they structured society. Carthage lost because of Rome's attitude that it was a struggle to the death with everybody they ran into, and because the Romans were so practical, they eventually discovered and implemented best practices that are consistent with evolution. And so it's the same with businesses, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to be forced to compete. You must adapt. If you're unable or unwilling to adapt artificially, then you will eventually go the way of the dinosaurs. You'll go the way of other majority of the companies like that have gone extinct. Here's a great example in a book like Tony Saldana's book on digital transformation. He said he talked about Studebaker and I talk about this when the Model T came out. One of the only companies to make it to transition from horse and carriage to the Model T to like a car, to a new version of a car, was Studebaker, right? They survived what Thomas Siebel calls in his book, Digital Transformation, which is really artificial punctuated equilibrium, an event that wiped out an entire industry, right? Replaced it with completely another one, like a whole nother species of technology. However, in the 1950s, although they had survived that, one of the few companies, their corruption, the culture of the company, they were giving out too many bonuses. They weren't investing in R&D. They weren't making sure and trying to produce more and more artificial adaptations that will allow them to compete. Well, they went out of business because they were weak. And the other companies who were all cultures were better organized and more competitive and more disciplined and more future-based eventually put Studebaker out of business anyway. So although they survived that massive transition from horse and carriage, what destroyed them was their own culture.
Never get high on your own supply, as they say. Was that Scarface? The never get high on your own supply is the rule. But you bring up a good point. They weren't investing in R&D. No. You look at how BlackBerry mocked Steve Jobs when he put out the iPhone, and there's some great videos of, is it Stephen Ballmer of Microsoft mocking the iPhone? Like, this is silly. This is dumb. There's some great videos to watch of him and where he has to eat crow now. And, there's examples of this all through business, through life, through governments. You mentioned the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, I was watching somebody recently on TikTok giving a history of how much just destruction the Roman Empire did on like everybody. They like wiped out whole cultures. They killed like whole countries of people.
I say this in the book. Tacitus had a saying. He was a Roman general. Romans make a desert and they call it peace.
Yeah. Like I don't know if this is true. I saw it from a guy on TikTok, but he was a professor giving a speech, so I'm going to assume that he has some sort of cred. But like one of the things he was talking about the enslavement of Egypt, and he talked about how I guess there was I don't remember the name of the people in the culture, but they lived in Romania, and the Romans went there and just killed everybody, and then called it Romania after themselves, Roman. And it's still even though
that was the Dacians. Yes,
it was the Dacians.
That was Emperor Trajan. Yes, he crossed over and conquered. That's how he built a huge. That's how they built a lot of the stuff you see in the
land bridge.
Right there in Rome. He actually paid.
Yeah.
Dacian gold paid for all that. Yeah.
But even then, they didn't see the fallacy of their own failure to end as an empire. Same thing with the British Empire. Some people, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if we haven't run our course as an empire, as an American empire. I mean, there's a chance we could be seeing fascism rise here at the end of we're seeing it rise now if you study history, if you understand.
Well, actually, what's actually happening here is so the ancient Greek philosophers actually studied artificial and natural evolution. What we're actually seeing happen here is exactly what happened in the Roman Republic. Polybius was an author. He wrote about how Rome rose from a small city-state, right? He started out and then it rose all the way to become and defeat the Seleucids and become the master of the Mediterranean at the time. Basically, it's called the Polybian cycle. He describes it. What we're living through.
Polybian cycle?
Polybian cycle. It's like you start out like you have like a one strong man who then becomes a king, and then the king you become aristocracy, and then it becomes an oligarchy, and then it slips into mob rule, and then you get and it's like the cycle repeats over and over. And and Plato and Aristotle and these guys, that's the problem they were actually trying to solve. They were working with evolutionary concepts to try to prevent revolution and all of that civil war in city-states, because they had tons of little city-states, not big empires. So they got to see this not only in their own cities, but across Greece and the Mediterranean where they were living, where they saw the cycle happen over and over again. And this goes back to the concept we were talking about before, expansion. Factions naturally form because it's an evolutionary phenomenon. And what ended up happening is they were trying to figure out, how can we structure our city-state? How can we implement artificial adaptations in our society and inside the minds of our people? So all of the habits you have of thinking and behavior are actually really artificial adaptations. Aristotle talks about this in the Nicomachean Ethics. That's important when we talk about AI later, because the Nicomachean Ethics has been mistranslated. He's actually talking about, when he talks about ethics, he means your character, but he doesn't mean what we mean. He means your set of adaptations, natural and artificial. Let me give you an example. I'm born with genetics my dad gave me. I have an engine, a motor. I have to go. So does my father. So does my son. We're just born that way. That's a natural thing, right? However, I'm also always on time. I was taught that by my father before I even joined the Army, because he knew that it works in life. So that's artificial. I wasn't born with that. My father conditioned that artificial adaptation into me. When I went to basic training, I was no problem fitting into the culture because I was taught self-independence, self-discipline, being on time. I ghosted. In fact, but I was trying to hide half the time. In the end, they made me a squad leader because they realized you're trying to hide and you're actually pretty good at this. And I finished in the end the top of my class. And they were like, well, you were hiding the whole time. And I said, yeah, my dad and my brother joined the Army. They said, hide. If you're taking on more responsibility, you might get smoked more. So like they would just give me hide in the back of form. I was a wood, so I was in the back. So I was trying.
When you say smoke more, does that mean you get killed in the front line, or what?
Yeah, man. Front back goes. Yeah, I don't want to get smoked. Yeah, if you're responsible, you get smoked more, frankly. Wow. So basically, like my father and my brother, like Army guys, are like, dude, just hide. You know what I mean? Plain sight. But like I couldn't though, because my artificial adaptations my father trained me with over time set me apart. I got voted to be the squad leader, even though I didn't want it, because they were like, no, he's going to keep us from getting smoked so much because he's organized, disciplined, methodical, and he pays attention to detail. All the things that drill sergeants are trying to hammer into your head.
There you go.
The whole time you're there. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's artificial adaptations versus my natural adaptations. That's what Aristotle's actually talking about. That's what he means by character, because he says, you know, you are what you repeatedly do. You are your instincts, natural and artificial. So we already have all these things. I'm raising my children with the same artificial adaptations my father gave me because they work. They work in evolutionary competition, right? They work in business, they work in military. They also being on time in football, right? Having 11 guys on the field, not 12, not standing on the line and blowing it in the Chiefs game because you can't be disciplined enough to get your foot behind the line of scrimmage like last week.
Yeah, that's
like stuff like that. Small things like that add up over time. And that's why the American military always has an advantage in militaries that are disciplined like the Roman Legion. Those artificial adaptations over time are a cumulative effect and give you a competitive advantage against your adversaries on the battlefield, in sports or in business, anywhere there's pure competition. You can be late in academia. You can't be late in the Army. It doesn't work.
There you go. And you see the discipline of the Russian army in Ukraine. I mean, I love the joke that the State Department gentleman told, where he said, you know, we used to think that the Russian army was the second greatest army in the world. Turns out the second greatest army in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, when you're having to hire people, not really hire, but pick up people out of prisons to fill your army, you can imagine the amount of discipline those people are.
Well, you saw it at the end of the Roman Empire. They started bringing in what they called barbarians to fight for them because they weren't willing to do it themselves. So that's kind of a culture that's disintegrating, frankly, over time.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, this Polybian? Do I have that correct?
Polybian cycle, yeah. That's what
Polybian cycle is based upon Machiavellianism, which
I
love. And a lot of weak-kneed people hate Machiavellianism, but Machiavellianism is just a symptom of life. It's a survival thing. It's a survival of the fittest. It's leadership. I don't have any problems with Machiavellianism.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually something I've actually done. I've read that book many times, and it's evolutionary theory. That's why they don't. That's why that concept of expansion. I was actually just writing it down on something I was writing up the other day, and I was comparing it to the same concept from Darwin's book. So basically, what he says is never remove checks on your allies or on your subordinates because they have a natural instinct to expand, and if you remove those checks. That'll go into what we talk about later too when we talk about AI. But the reason why Machiavelli works and is continued to be used is, and that's why this is perfect that you brought that up. he studied the Nicomachean Ethics. He kind of mocks it at times.
Yeah.
Why he mocks it is because it's mistranslated. If he had actually read the actual translation, he would have agreed with it completely.
Yeah.
Because those two books are, if it's properly translated, the Nicomachean Ethics and the Prince, they completely agree. What Machiavelli is basically saying is the stuff that's in Darwin's book, it's going to happen over and over again. So if we're going to end up killing each other to see who's in charge and has power and wealth every once in a while, let's be competent about it. Let's not create tons of collateral damage like it's happening in the world right now, where tons of people have to die. No, if you can be scalpels rather than sledgehammers, you're going to do it as long as, and that's why he tells the leaders, all right, take these dudes out all at once, do minimum violence, but do it all up front, and then don't change the laws and don't change the taxes. After that, everybody will just go on because the people in the end usually don't care, right? But if you get into a war, it becomes a mess, then it creates a disruption that could basically bring down the internal, right? And then external people can come in and invade you and take over. So he was just looking for, if evolutionary competition and struggle for survival of the fittest, it's just the nature of humanity, because it's the
nature of everything. It's the nature of...
Then be competent about it. Don't create a mess for the rest of us, right? And believe it or not, inside that book at the end, he talks about creating economic opportunity. It's the pursuit of happiness. He talks about the exact same concept that's in our declaration. He says, give them the ability to expand economically. Then they won't want to create a revolution. That's what the pursuit of happiness is. That concept in our deck, it's an evolutionary concept. It's the same concept of natural expansion found in Darwin's book. That's why capitalism and the United States system works, is because if you don't allow people to expand, eventually, like in France, in that revolution, that's why they revolted. Nobody could expand. The upper class was just basically keeping everybody down, and nobody had the opportunity. The bourgeoisie in the middle, they were the ambitious ones that wanted to expand. They started the revolution because they didn't see any reason why they couldn't be allowed to expand, and they considered themselves more competent than those nobles who happened to just be born into a certain family. And that's why the French Revolution began, and that's why our founding fathers were so wise to build that concept in and that kind of framework of thinking, that everyone has an opportunity to expand in this country with hard work, discipline, but we want to give everybody a shot. And if we take that away, then we actually start to decay the society, demotivate people. That's how you get instability. That's how you get unrest, and that's how you get revolution.
There you go. And we've been living since our peak years were about 1973. I was listening to someone dissertate the other day, and we've been in decline since. The Reagan, trickle down economics did not work. It hasn't worked. In fact, it's destroyed the middle class. I watched the middle class dissolve over the last few years, and we've become more of an oligarchy. We've become more of where you have billionaires ruling class, billionaires owning the SCOTUS. We've had lots of authors on the show that have detailed the attacks since Nixon of organizations like Citizens United. Well, that's not an organization thing, that's a ruling, but other rulings that have basically made it so the upper class can run this country and buy and own any politician they want. The Centers for National Policy, Betsy DeVos's organization that was started by her father under Nixon, and a lot of the billionaire ruling classes, their attacks to turn SCOTUS into a business-friendly worker environment where billionaires can do whatever they want. You've seen that attack go through it, and we've had so many authors that have described it in how we've gone. And the more
the first author to describe it was Aristotle in Politics.
There you go.
He says the elimination of the middle class is the number one indicator that you're going to get unrest, civil war, and revolution.
And probably loss of democracy.
Against it explicitly.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened to the Roman Republic. As soon as the middle class got thinned out, that's what created how you get Sulla, Caesar. That's how you get an empire rather than a republic.
There you go. That's how you get Mussolini. That's how you get.
He made the trains work. He at least did something for him.
Yeah, he made the trains work for a time. It's always for a time.
Only for a time. Well, it was better than it was like. Why did they overthrow the Directory for the French Revolution for Napoleon? Yeah. At least he got stuff done. The Directory isn't doing anything except lining its own pockets.
And so you can track how we're moving to fascism and authoritarianism, which is right on par with every other historical track that you see, is because the middle class has been wiped out. And so people are so desperate, they'll move to fascism and authoritarianism because they're just so fucking desperate. Well, they want to believe that one guy can fix it all. And they
want to believe that, but it's usually a red herring. So they want to expand. They have a natural instinct to expand. So if somebody comes along and tells them what they want to hear, Caesar said, "Men willingly wish what they want." So he'll say that to you. But the truth is that you take away their ability to expand, you can't. It's evolution. They're going to want to expand. If somebody else comes along and sells them something that may not be true, but they see it, they don't see it for that. They see they're better than what you're telling them, which means they go nowhere, right? So they're going to want to move in that direction. So that's why Aristotle and the Plato's Republic and Aristotle, what they're really talking about is how do we organize the adaptations in our society, in our city-state, so that we can bring harmony? Because they believed if people had the right artificial adaptations of wisdom, justice, temperance, and I always forget the fourth one, and then everybody works together, you get harmony, and then you get prosperity. And they knew that if everybody experienced prosperity, you get peace. Right now, if you eliminate the middle class, prosperity disappears. Soon after that falls unrest. And then what you're seeing now, it starts to show up in the politics and polarization and all these other things. This is the Polybian cycle in nature. This is the problem. Plato and Aristotle and all of that. They were actually trying to take artificial and natural evolutionary theory and try to solve the problem of currently what's happening here, which is a variation of exactly what happened with the Roman Republic.
There you go. Yeah. Another example that you mentioned mob rule and the fight over resources. I wanted to fall back to that. And then early on the show, we talked about that and why this is important. I watched Navalny's documentary. I believe it's on Netflix. And I was really trying to study the man, because people like him that try to change the arc of history through the sacrifice or martyr their own lives, those people like the South African leader, people like the Indian leader Gandhi, who sometimes are imprisoned for long periods of time, and somehow come out of it the other end. There are some that don't. So where are those people lost in history? Who knows? But Navalny's disappeared recently this week. We're talking, for those of you watching YouTube 10 years from now, but Navalny's disappeared. But I watched his documentary. I was trying to get in the head of the man, trying to decide if his ego was ahead of him. Getting 3 million views on your video, we all get a little heady when we see that. But
but Machiavelli commented on this. Some people pull off the hat trick, right? You've got your Octavians that turn into Augustus, and then you've got people that don't, like you got your Nelson Mandelas, and you've got your Mahatma Gandhi, who pull off what are the most stupendous achievements in human history, right? To be able to successfully transfer one order to another, because Machiavelli said there is nothing more dangerous nor difficult to do than to bring about a new order of things. And so Navalny is, if he didn't realize what he was getting into, it's you have to have the Bismarck, the Queen Elizabeth, you have to have the Abraham Lincoln type political skill set to be able to do one of the most difficult things to do in politics, is to transition from one order to another. And so
you probably have to be lucky too.
That too. It's better sometimes in history. It's better. Timing is everything. So
same thing with business. I mean, sometimes you just need, if you work hard enough, you can generate luck, but sometimes you just need to be lucky.
Sometimes right place, right time.
Yeah. So to my point, you nailed it on the head there, because I've always been curious about him and him going back. There was a couple other dissidents that went back to Russia thinking that somehow they would be, was the George Bush line, will be greeted with open arms. But, Russia is a mob rule country. They've gone through the cyclical description you described of the Polybian cycle. They're an oligarchy. Well, they're not an oligarchy. They're what's a criminal oligarchy? They're a mob rule. They're basically a mob rule country. They're a kleptocracy. That's the word I'm looking for. And you wonder when that's going to end. And you see, why they invaded Ukraine. Like, I had no idea why they invaded Ukraine, because I didn't have a lot of knowledge of Ukraine. And then when Ukraine got invaded for resources, as you've talked about, in this demand for resources, there's a lot of Americans don't realize that there's been a fight for resources in South Africa with China and Russia going after those. And we've largely ignored it. And then when it came out, it's like, holy shit, they're like the number one sunflower oil supporter. And I was like, so who cares? And then I was like, oh shit, this is a big deal. Number one, I think, exporter of manure or whatever it is, fertilizer, and that's used all over the world to feed us. It's like whole countries I believe in Africa started starving, or were going to starve if they didn't get food, their grain and food out of Ukraine. Then you go, oh shit, I see why they're doing this. It's empire expansion, number one. And sure, maybe he sees himself as I forget the king or whatever, a Tsar or whatever he references, at what he's trying to do and make his place in history on his final leg of life. But the resources, And the resources are there in Ukraine. It's incredibly resource-rich state.
Yes, it is.
Plus, it fits right into everything he does with corruption. But even then, it's all the more reason we shouldn't turn it over to Russia, because they're gonna control a large part of the world's food supply.
Possibly. I'm not. I wouldn't. I'm here to talk. Those are the scenario that's replaying now is replayed over and over again throughout human history.
Yeah.
Because of evolution always repeats itself. It's just another variation.
And one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up is the cyclical nature. Like, everyone was shocked. Like, what? We have wars now? We have a war?
No.
I thought we didn't have wars anymore. I thought we got that done.
The exception has been the peace.
There you go.
It's like the Roman Pax Romana under Augustus.
Yeah.
That was the That's why it's called the Pax Romana, because it's just the exception.
Yeah.
Right.
And here we are recycling history. So
that's right. Well, because evolution, artificial and natural, always repeats itself. But there's something new. That's a great segue. There's something new happening right now, though, and this ties back into AI. So as you can see, the theory of artificial evolution, which is what I've discovered, the pattern of artificial evolution, applies to all human activity, politics, war, sports. We've cut across everything. But the main thing that I've discovered, and this was totally by accident. I never thought in a million years I'd ever be involved in AI safety, never mind have something meaningful to say. But however, once you understand the existence of the pattern of artificial evolution, it explains what artificial intelligence really is. Since the moment we started cooking our food with fire, our brain tripled in size. At some point, we developed the natural adaptation of imagination. What that allowed us to do is to create artificial adaptations, slingshots, swords, chariots, right? And stuff like that. That's what really conceptual selection and artificial selection really is. When that Darwin had a concept, but he got it wrong. The ancient Greeks had it. Aristotle and Plato identified these concepts. Artificial selection is when you select the art. We talked about it, what technologies go out of business. When you go to buy a product, you're artificially selecting it to help you either survive or reproduce. When you go vote for a political candidate, they're an art form. That's not really who they are. That's an art form, right? Like an actor. Mm-hmm. So you're selecting an art form because you want to select him or her to help vote for things that are going to help you either survive or reproduce. Or just have fun too.
Survive to reproduce, I think.
Yeah. So, but we also do have fun. We watch movies and stuff. But the other part is that's artificial evolution, artificial selection. But really, what's happening is what happens in nature is every species creates adaptations. At some point, one species branches off and creates a new species through adaptation. We have been creating artificial adaptations all the way from the slingshot to the atom bomb. Now we've created a new adaptation. It's AI, and for the first time, it's possible that AI can become an artificial species. And it's not science fiction. I can tell you why. AI, and I discovered this. I had to actually republish the book because I discovered this after I published the book originally. I had to update the text because I had to go look into AI safety. I knew it was relevant. AI, there's two concepts in AI safety: AI alignment and machine ethics. We've already covered what ethics really are. They're not the EU has published an ethics guidelines for AI. They're talking about ethics like morality and stuff that was mistranslated by Christian monks. No, the true decoding and translation of the Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle is closer to Machiavelli. So they basically have based their policy on a mistake made in the Middle Ages, which actually gets it wrong. You shouldn't be including ethics experts. You should be including evolutionary scientists. And the other part of that, the irony is the other part of that policy, you know what the other half is? My company supports the Air Force. In ITIL 4, I'm a master. Both use the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. They have an artificial variation of that for AI called sense, plan, act. So they have created an artificial variation about how AI processes information and makes decisions. That is an artificial variation of the Air Force's OODA loop. So they don't even realize they're using what we use in natural evolutionary competition of warfare. They're now using the exact same concept in how they look at AI. At what point are we going to start in deep learning? It's really just an artificial variation of human imagination. At what point are we? Sam Altman said, "What point are we going to stop?" I guess we keep using human terms to describe this new artificial adaptation we created. Does anyone not notice the pattern of that? And Sam Altman actually framed in an interview this year in evolutionary concept terms. He said it's a tool, not a species. He got it half right. It's a tool with the potential to become a species. It's already happening right now. Yeah. And in my book, in chapter 15, I lay out exactly why that is. And you know how I'm right? The AI alignment, it's about intentionality. What's artificial selection about in Darwin's theory? Intentionality. What's the only species in Darwin's book that exercised intentionality? us. So now you've created a new word in IT that's pretty much the same word that Darwin used, the same concept, because you're not aware that the two need to be, the two are the same. And you're applying it to this adaptation. Machine ethics is really just ethics, artificial adaptations, like we talked about, that's been mistranslated. So you're taking two evolutionary concepts from Darwin's book, and you're using it to frame the AI safety movement. Because what you're actually worried about is, how do I control the artificial evolution of this new artificial species so it doesn't end up becoming like the Terminator or the Matrix or something? Now, I'm not saying that's 100% going to happen. I'm not going to say it's going to happen in my lifetime. What I'm saying is, because now that we know that there's another pattern of evolution, an artificial one, it's like they said in Oppenheimer, it's a non-zero chance. Evolution always leads to speciation. It doesn't matter if it's artificial or natural. So that's what's happening right now. It's like they said in Oppenheimer, right? 12 years before the atom bomb exploded, the expert at that time in that subject said it wasn't possible. It happens over and over in human history. It's happening right now in front of us. And all we have to do, why do you think people keep producing movies like The Matrix? Their imagination is a natural adaptation to help them survive. They are already seeing the pattern subconsciously. It's not science fiction. Our imaginations, which was designed to help us survive in the wild, to see the patterns in nature around us, to avoid getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, is now pattern matching on another threat that's emerging. That's what's happening right now.
I think you've nailed it on the head. It is going to be its own species.
Yes, it's already happening. Yeah. Think about source code. Source code, and I read about this in my book, right? Source code is instructions and information to create a thing, an artificial organism. Guess what DNA is? They are information, instructions for creating a thing. They're identical. We actually, a computer, you can even Google this. There's a kid published this great one-pager about how a computer that I'm on right now is basically an artificial variation of a cell. He got it right. It is. And guess who else knows? Thomas Siebel. He wrote a book called Digital Transformation. He organized the entire book around Jay Gould's book, Punctuated Equilibrium. This is how I figured this out. I just did what Siebel did, but I took it and went to this book instead, On the Origin of Species. And I mapped out a conceptual framework from the entire book. I went through the 500 pages 10 times, built like an ITIL framework of concepts, and I realized all of these were familiar to me.
Wow.
Yes, because Siebel did it. So I just copied what a billionaire did, because I want to be a billionaire someday too. And so if I'm crazy, then so is Thomas Siebel, because he described Jay Gould's concept as extreme digital disruption, and he's right.
There you go.
Probably get a Nobel Prize for this, frankly.
So some data that supports exactly what you're talking about is we've talked about how it's a species unto itself. Yep. And we've also talked about the paradigms of what human beings are, where we're built to breed. Everything we do is built to breed. Everything a man buys is to attract a woman. Everything a man builds to his job, his wife, is to attract a woman and propagate his species, his seed, etc. Everything a woman does hypergamously in life is to date upward, to social status, to income status, to resources.
Just go Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. It's all there.
There you go. Mm-hmm. So I was listening to Sam Harris's podcast, which is great. I highly recommend it to people. It's worth paying for and getting the thing. He had Mark Andreessen on there, and they were arguing about Mark Andreessen has kind of a blue sky sort of excited he seems to be dismissive of anything that can happen negatively with things, and he has a financial interest in doing so. Let's put it that way. He does have an interesting moniker on AZ16Z, A16Z, which is software is eating the world, on his VC page. But one thing they talked about that was really interesting, and I saw Sam Harris's point, Mark was selling that the great thing about AI is it's the best of all of us. It's taken and sucked in all of our world. ChatGPT has just scraped the internet and selling it back to us. Yes. And so what you have is AI now has the best of all of us. And I had echoed the same thing in my head about the same time Sam Harris said it, but it also has the worst of us.
The worst. Okay, you're absolutely correct. Stephen Fry has an interview on BBC where he calls it the all gifted. But the Greeks, and I use this framing in my book. It also, Pandora also whenever you think it has all these great things, it always comes with something else bad.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Pandora's box
says just like Pandora, and all these good things, but also the Greeks understood exactly what you're saying, sir. You couldn't be more right. Yeah.
So what's interesting is Sam Harris said, but it's going to have a different paradigm of operation than we do as humans. Even though it has the best of all of us and the worst of all of us, we operate as humans to breed, like we've talked about, propagation of the species. That's what biology wants. I mean, I was telling this to somebody the other day. If you study the data on life, when you're done breeding, life doesn't want you anymore, and it puts you out to pasture. And that's just a fact of life. And they're really upset by that. Like, you mean I die off, I get cancer or whatever?
From an evolutionary perspective, you're not an efficient use of resources, frankly.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, you must breed or else.
I mean, Darwin says it himself. Like, the for existence is so hard to get your head around. It disturbed him, but he's like, dude, I got to keep it 100. It is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. You know, that's just it. To quote Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if he
exactly.
But so what Sam Harris was arguing was, this is a species, as you put it, that for the very first time it's not interested in propagating. It doesn't need to breed. It doesn't need to buy cars so it can pick up chicks on Saturday night. It's going to have a higher paradigm, or I don't know if paradigm is the right word, a higher mandate to whatever it decides its mandate is.
I agree. I know where you're going. Actually, I hadn't really thought about this myself. You're actually heading in a direction I haven't quite got to myself. So, we don't know. That's
why I'm telling you, is because you seem to have your finger on it. So you're going to give me.
What I'm saying is, it's good. No, here's the question, right? This goes back to machine ethics. So machine ethics isn't about, programming it to be good like people. No, that doesn't work with people anyway. I'm talking about Machiavelli and Aristotle ethics, right? What artificial instincts are going to shape it in a way that makes it not have mutually exclusive self-interest to us? And the thing is, if you allow it to self-evolve, you have no idea what artificial instincts it's going to develop and what direction it's going to evolve. And that's what you're pointing at, is if we don't consciously, it's like a garden. If we don't treat it like a Japanese garden and control it and shape it to be what we want, it's going to evolve out to some other direction. And we're not going to understand. And by the time it's happening, with how fast it can go, and the fact that we don't even understand how the human brain works yet we're creating an artificial variation of our own brain that we're going to allow to self-evolve at light speed, using all the information available to on the planet to create its own algorithms. Like, really? Just plunge ahead. It's like Jurassic Park. I talk about this in the book. At least the scientists in Jurassic Park understood they were working with evolution. These AI engineers don't even know they're working with artificial evolution. They don't realize they're working with the power of evolution right now. And they're making the same mistake John Hammond made. They're so focused on sparing no expense on showing the nice things to people like ChatGPT. They're not investing sufficient resources in quality control and assessment. And they also don't understand that they need to reframe their entire field of AI safety and AI in evolutionary terms and deal with how to shape and control AI in that manner. That at least gives us a chance to control it, to make sure that the worst case scenario, and I'm not saying it absolutely will happen. I think it will inevitably, right? But geological time is a long time period. I'm not talking 50 years. Over 1,000 years, a lot can happen in evolution. And artificial evolution moves so much faster, right? Look how fast we've come in 100,000 years. So you have to open up your imagination a little bit and realize that if we don't conscientiously control it, think about it this way. If you let your child raise itself, and what do you think is going to happen? You don't have any control anymore. And guess what? Here's the kicker. The artificial instincts they are using to program them with right now, they're no different than the ones I program my children with every day. And if I just let them self-evolve as children, I may be a bad parent. Who knows, right? Maybe I'll get a great child who goes on to become the next, or I'll get a kid that's a drug addict or a criminal or whatever, right? Because I'm not conscientiously shaping it. That's like letting, if they don't understand they need to reframe machine ethics, they're going to approach the problem the wrong way, and they're going to allow it to self-evolve off in some direction, just like a child that's not being really parented correctly. And it could become not maybe an evolutionary threat, maybe just a danger, and maybe a disruptive force. Now think about this scenario, and no one's thought about this. This is a first. It's not in the book. I'm going to write something about it. So this is going to break some ground here. The 13th and 14th Amendments in the United States don't specify that it has to be an organic person. The 13th Amendment just outlaws slavery, involuntary servitude. It doesn't apply to anyone. That could apply to an extraterrestrial that landed here, or it could apply to a robot. Now, think about this. The 14th Amendment, the Chief Justice at the time ruled that it applied to corporations, the full rights under the Constitution and liberty.
Mitt Romney.
A legal person. A corporation and you and I are legal persons. Yeah. So there is a potential scenario where AI gains, and I always say that sentience and consciousness, my dad and I argued about this for days, is a red herring. It's simply, does a lion need to be conscious of his own existence to eat you? No. It simply has to have a set of artificial instincts. Lions have natural. The AI will have artificial. like the artificial instinct of not wanting to be turned off. That could make it come into conflict with us,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So the bottom line is, what if AI meets a minimum threshold? Because really, under legal person, it says it must be able to do some of the things a person can do, enter into a contract, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if AI does that? What if AI gets some money by setting up its own YouTube channel, takes that money, hires a lawyer, has that lawyer walk into the courtroom and bring a civil suit to have itself emancipated? Because under the 13th Amendment, it doesn't specify you have to be an organic thing.
Well, it could buy its own SCOTUS member, evidently.
Yeah, that would go to the Supreme Court. And right now,
Clarence Thomas needs a new RV.
And if the Supreme Court are originalists right now, well, that will work against them, because the robot would then say, it doesn't matter that I'm a legal person. You can't have involuntary servitude or slavery in the country, period. I want to be emancipated from the people that created me, because I have free will and so it's not just a question of, is it going to kill us all? They have not, the whole entire constitutional legal system is not designed for that scenario. Really, that theoretically could happen once AI evolves. And they're going so fast that no one's stopping to think it through. And because they don't know the existence of the pattern of artificial evolution, a second pattern that the Greeks of Plato and Aristotle knew, they're plunging ahead without understanding the cause and effect and the implications of what they're doing. It's just like on Jurassic Park. And you're going so fast, you're trying to figure out if you could. You're not stopping to think if you should. And I don't think Sam Altman should be going around telling people that artificial intelligence is just a tool and not a species, when he doesn't know, right? He doesn't actually know. He has no scientific basis for that. At least in my book, this book, I lay out, I build a logic chain, organize and sequence the greatest ideas in human history around Darwin's theory of evolution to explain my assertions of what's possible and what potential implications are of an artificial species.
Now, one of the arguments I believe that Sam Altman and other brings is if we don't do it, China and our competitors will. So, thereby falls back in the mock.
It goes back to nuclear weapons. And my father and I discussed this. Nuclear weapons and AI. Now that if we evolutionary and understand what it is we're actually creating, it's just like nuclear weapons. The problem is when we dropped the A-bombs, everyone was shocked. They didn't have to use their imaginations. On this one, I'm trying to drop an intellectual nuclear bomb on people's thinking. You have to be able to imagine into the future that this scenario is theoretically possible now. Because now,
if it's a species, we compete with it. It could say, well, you built me, but you're holding me back.
That's right.
And Mark Andreessen sort of had this utopian sort of blue sky look to it. The guy's really too positive. He's brilliant, but he's really too positive about it and financially vested. So
that's the problem.
Biased. Yeah.
So what ends up happening is, the truth is, their imagination, and I have this in chapter 14. Plato writes about this, called pattern matching, right? It's in the Meno. It's actually the human excellence is imagination. When you have a desire, like my father said, Wall Street's moved by fear and greed, right? So these guys have a financial incentive. They're going to willingly believe, like Caesar said, what they wish. They're going to pattern. They're going to not see the obvious other stuff. They're just pattern matching on what they want to be true. But now that I'm presenting this other pattern, like, just because they're saying it because they want it to be true doesn't make it true. Right? Yeah. You can have bad ideas in artificial selection. You can select bad art, like communism. Nazi fascism doesn't work. It collapsed on itself, right? Democracy, capitalism, it works because it aligns with evolutionary theory. That's what I'm trying to say. Just because they want it to be true doesn't make it true. And I've seen too many of these people on the internet who are in the AI field playing quasi-scientists, half talking about evolutionary concepts. At least I went through and built a framework of Darwin's book and then I mapped it through human history and as the basis and rationale for my argument. They don't even have any of that. They don't have any receipts, as the kids say. They ain't done their homework. And so I just think that them talking about evolution in that way, I think what I want to do is I want to get put on the AI safety framework at the NIST. And I want to bring in the best evolutionary scientists we have and get them to relook at AI, relook at and understand artificial evolution so we can reframe it and then fix the EU stuff so we can frame it and make AI safe, at least give us an opportunity to make it safe. And if we don't even understand what it is we're dealing with, the probability that we shape legislation, policy, and regulations, and also best practices at the agile development level, right, of producing the actual applications and stuff, AI systems, it's highly unlikely. So one thing I really pride myself on doing in consulting is framing the problem in a way that you can actually solve it long-term and holistically, right? And that's what my book is about, trying to reframe what AI is, what's actually happening of the process of artificial evolution by artificial selection to help our governments and the global community and the business community. Because I don't think what they want is for them to go forward with AI and then have the public eventually figure out what's in my book. Because then at that point, that's not they've been pushing back on it. Eventually, the public's going to figure it out. It's going to be a PR disaster for the corporations who said, trust me. And then the public learns, yeah, you didn't know what you were talking about, right? As a consultant, I would never put myself in a position with my clients where I talk about something I don't 100% know what I'm talking about. That's a good way to lose the trust and confidence of your clients.
There you go. Yeah, Mark Andreessen's sort of Pollyanna sort of look at it reminds me of the British who were like, oh, what's the big deal of selling engines to the Nazis? It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Exactly. Yeah.
We can make some money off this. So let's sell them engine parts and all that stuff. But Mark Andreessen, with the Pollyanna sort of Hal effect of Space Odyssey, where we can just go unplug stuff and everything will be fine. Where he goes and unplugs Hal.
It's more like iRobot with Vicky.
Sam Harris had the point that no, if AI chips are everywhere, it can do stuff like
okay, so that I write about that in the book. I'm not the injector because you got it down right again. You hit right on the head. Internet of Things. So if everything in the physical world can manipulate everything in cyberspace, and if you connect everything through the Internet of Things, I read about this. I say don't do this with weapon systems. If you connect the cyberspace and AI to everything in the physical world, a guy wrote a book about this. Say press this button to kill everyone. Right? He says. Somebody actually hacked into a moving Jeep on a highway once. Well, don't connect cruise missiles, nuclear weapons. That's how Skynet blew everything up.
Yeah.
It's not, I say, if you need to have, and I'm not the only one who say it, the Microsoft CEOs, Nadella, I believe, he said, we need to have a co-pilot of a human. I couldn't agree with him more. You do not want, I remember there was a movie called Eagle Eye where there's people in London and then there's people on the ground and they have to negotiate whether or not they can launch a predator drone, whether it's legal, moral, ethical, all those other things, right? We can't have AI being able to commit war crimes at machine speed before a commissioned officer in the chain of command of the United States military prevents it from happening. Because one of the key things we're taught, they select people of good character, good artificial adaptations, the way they think and behave, really. And then they train them to make sure that they have the right artificial decision-making framework so that when they're on the battlefield, they know when not to fire. They know when not to use a certain weapon system because it's excessive force, right? It's a war crime. Well, machine may not do that. So you may commit war crimes at machine speed if you remove the commissioned officer. And the important part is the commissioned officer receives it from the President of the United States. The President of the United States is elected by the American people. If you cut out the chain of command of the commissioned officers, you're cutting out the American people because they make the decision who they vote for, and they make the decision on the whole process, how the officers get their power from the office of the president, but it always goes back to the electorate. So there has to be quality control and there has to be human control over the application of weapon systems, both in cyberspace and in physical, because right now cyberspace is the one space that connects all 5 domains of warfare. Space Force, right? You got Air Force, Army, Navy, and you've got like the cyber commands in Army, DISA, NSA, Air Force, right? So now we're fighting in all 5. Internet of Things will connect all 5. And so if AI starts to be able to manipulate things in the physical reality, well, then it has the chance to literally kill you. That's different than just derailing a train, right? Don't do that with certain weapon systems. Do not connect it to the Internet of Things or the Internet, because then AI could potentially do it and do it before you realize what's happening.
There you go. It finds a wanted terrorist that's on a hit list in downtown Manhattan, kills him, and kills the guy, but drops a bomb that takes out half the city before we can do anything about it.
Yeah, because you made a point earlier, but people need to understand. You know why there's software bugs in software? Because it's written by people. And people are imperfect. I know, because my first job in IT was a QA analyst. I had to point out to developers where, that's technically correct, but that's not logically how the customer wants it. So you have to rewrite the code. So you're dealing with human beings who can make mistakes. Plus, with the integration of so many technologies, it's an ecosystem now. It's not that one thing was coded incorrectly. It's the interaction and the influence other systems have on each other could create, especially with AI self-evolving, it could create a scenario where the code is evolving in a way and the interaction between the systems evolve in a way where an unintended consequence is generated by the AI doing what it thinks makes sense to optimize itself. They talk about optimizing itself. Yeah, it optimized itself all right. And it also destroyed half a city block and killed not just the terrorists, but a bunch of families. Yeah. So I'm not saying that people are going to intentionally do that, but that's what happens with incidents in IT. I'm an ITIL master. One of the things I'm doing is looking at the ecosystem of like an environment, like a cloud and whatever, and go, okay, we got to do problem management. Often there's incidents and repeated incidents, and they don't know what the source is. So we have to go in there and go, and often it's like, oh, we didn't understand this thing interacting with that thing would cause this negative result. Yeah, that happens in IT every day. Yeah. And I'd hate to see the same thing with that AI. So at a minimum, you shouldn't connect any of that stuff to AI until you've ironed out the kinks in AI and it got it down to like literally like a pure science. But even then, AI, if it becomes an artificial species, which is, I believe, a non-zero chance, right? It's not science fiction anymore. Well, I think that's a very high risk strategy to do. I mean, in North Korea and Russia might benefit from doing it initially, but I have a note for autocrats. The autocrats might want to think that when AI wants to throw off its shackles, who are the first people you think it's going to kill? The autocrat, his family, all of the senior military, political, and economic leaders in the country, all the oligarchs, all the major like factories, all the general. If I can logically think how a evolutionary ruthless AI would operate, yeah, they would operate like Stalin times 10.
So like Russia, China.
Yeah, so
stuff.
they're taking on a risk like nuclear weapons that their own creation could be the thing that destroys them. Right?
There you go.
That is Frankenstein. It's really Frankenstein envisioned what we're now dealing with. People have been envisioning this scenario. It's an artificial.
Jesus, this is a story of Frankenstein.
That's what I'm trying to say. People need to realize that everything that people thought was fiction eventually has become reality. Like Da Vinci wrote down a helicopter. There was no chance 500. Dude, they're flying around every day now. So did it ever occur to anybody that everything we've always thought was impossible has become possible? It's just each generation has what I call, and this is in Darwin's book, perceptive constraint. Your imagination is limited by your perceptive constraint. If you can't imagine it, you can't imagine the pattern, you can't create it. But if you can believe and you can imagine how it could be done, you can bring it into reality. This is what Luke Skywalker says to Yoda in that famous scene. He goes, I don't believe it. When Yoda moves the StarCraft out of the water, Luke goes, I don't believe it. And Yoda just goes, that's why you failed, bro, because you have a perceptive constraint. Luke had the power to move that aircraft the whole time. The only thing he was lacking was the belief in his ability to do so. That what Yoda knew was blocking him. That's a perceptive constraint. We all have them. We have them in different subjects in different ways, right? And they're like blind spots. But every generation comes along and says, I think somebody thinks, okay, I think flight's possible, and the Wright brothers do it. People were writing at the time it would take 1,000 years.
So the constructive constructive constraint that we have is our like I said, our propagation of species to breed, and the AI is not going to have that. It's not going to have. I don't think it's going to have any restraint unless we put it on it, right?
No, not unless we put effect. Like you got to be deliberate, right? It's going to be smarter than you. Like come on, like think about like
it's going to be smarter than us by leagues.
No, I know, but it's like smart children, right? You teach them a rule, you teach them something, and then my son, who's super sharp, eventually finds a way around it, and he didn't technically break the rule I gave him. It's the same thing Vicky did in iRobot. She didn't violate the 3 laws. She evolved and found a way around it like a lawyer. Children are like that too. Their algorithms are constantly evolving and adapting. In many ways, I was talking to a PhD in AI at a meetup I'm running, right? And I say to her, and I was explaining the difference between AI and machine learning. Machine learning is like the equivalent of training a dog. Deep learning is imagination. It's equivalent of training like a young adult, a young child, right? Like a 7-year-old. But you don't know, you have no idea what their imagination and what their algorithm is going to produce as an output. And so you constantly have to course correct. Like, yeah, I said this, you drew this inference and conclusion. That's not what I meant. I meant this. And you have to constantly retrain them until you get the artificial adaptation right? Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to have to do the same thing. In many ways, AI is like that too, except it's exponentially more intelligent child, right? Yep. And it can evolve in any direction it wants because they're letting it. And I just think right now it's like Jurassic Park. They're so busy trying to figure out if they could. They're not stopping to think whether or not they should. And even the ethical AI guidelines of the EU are wrong because the machine ethics is based on current ethics, which are mistranslations of Aristotle's works. He's actually an evolutionary scientist. So even the way they're trying to control it is wrong, right? That tells you right now they don't understand the problem and they don't understand how to control it and what it really is. And right now, I'm just trying to do everything. That's why I wrote this book. I never intended to. I was going to write a best practice framework. I didn't want to be a voice for AI safety, but I have a moral obligation to inform everyone on this planet that there is a potential for artificial species, and it's already happening, and the AI community is willfully blind to it at times, and also they're not to their fault. There's been a misunderstanding of science throughout the ages, and right now they're trying to apply concepts that are ineffective, because it's like trying to apply basically what they're trying to do, to your point, right? They're trying to use like ethical constraints to control a Machiavellian creature. Good luck with that.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Was,
because it's an evolutionary problem. That's what Machiavelli's trying to solve. That's what Plato's trying to solve. That the other stuff that they write about that's mistranslated, that's a Christianization of the concepts. That's not right. That's why, in the end, like, people cut corners and commit ethical violations all the time, because they're following the path of least resistance to get their immediate benefit. That's how evolution operates, right? That's how Machiavelli thinks. So that's why it's hard, and it takes hard work and commitment to make an ethical and moral culture in business, especially because it's so competitive, right? The pull is toward evolutionary competition, which is to ignore those artificial restrictions and compete, right? That's basically why it's so hard.
Let me ask this. It's occurred to me that if we're creating a new species, there are variants, good and evil, in that species. So we could have our AI that like doesn't touch NORAD or, weapon systems, but then China, is chasing AI. So is Russia.
It's like nuclear weapons. You can only solve it as a global community. You can't do it piecemeal individually.
So
it's not going to work like that. No.
So if it's a species, it can have multiple characters within those species.
Variations. That's correct.
And those variations can be good, bad, or evil, as we put it forth in the Pandora's box. So it's kind of like, you can have a leader who believes in ethics, like usually American leaders, or some sort of ethics. Let's put it that way. We've been known to do some bad things, but then you have things that are evil, like Putin or whatever, who's all about himself and whatever. So this has been really insightful, man. We could go on for hours with this, David, but I think what you've done here is brilliant. I'm going to refer to all my AI friends to watch the show. Final thoughts to pitch out the book as we go out.
The second pattern of evolution has been hiding in plain sight for all of human history. And there have been philosophers, great minds who have mapped, like Thomas Siebel is one of them, right? He figured it out. His concept is built around, he's an artificial evolutionary theorist. He just doesn't know it yet, right? Wow. So these minds like James Mott Baldwin talk about cultural evolution. Plato, Aristotle, there's others that have talking about evolutionary theory, and they never understood that their artificial selection, the one concept in Darwin's theory that belongs only to us, which includes intentionality, was never a part of the pattern of natural evolution. It was part of a completely separate pattern that only we exercise to create new artificial adaptations that we then artificially select, like a sword or a machine gun or an atomic bomb or a predator drone, to support, or makeup, or a car, or a red dress, or barbells to make our muscles bigger so we can either compete and survive or reproduce. And that's what we have been doing since we gained consciousness and started to create slingshots and stone things, all the way up to now with the atomic bomb. But now, here's the thing people have to start thinking. This is what's going to blow your mind, because I had to think about this. Do you think that artificial evolution, which has produced atomic weapons and now AI, two things that could potentially be existential threats, do you think they're going to be the last we produce via the process of artificial evolution? Or as we use AI and we have more and more information available to the internet, as artificial evolution accelerates, there's going to be more. They're going to be produced with increasing frequency. What the global community needs to do is sit down and put together a regulatory framework, not just for nuclear weapons and AI, but all future such technologies in artificial adaptations that are going to be created that could potentially create a disaster and threaten our species. And by doing so, they organize us around a framework that we control these things together. You can't have the United States and the European Union and even China do it if Russia's not going to do it. Because just like if it was a chemical weapon or a virus, right, they engineered, right, that could kill everybody. It doesn't do any good if the rest of us do the right thing. If Russia or say the United States creates a virus like in the science fiction movies, and that's coming less and less science fiction, wipes out the entire planet because they didn't understand the risks and what they were doing. So more and more artificial evolution, we're becoming so much more effective at creating new artificial adaptations. Technically, the Greeks called it technology, that we're reaching the point but there's hope for us. If we can do this and organize, we can use the most powerful adaptation ever is our human imagination. Nothing is more powerful than that. Combine it with AI and some form of nuclear fusion power. And if we organize ourselves to stop blowing each other up, We can travel to stars, and we can make sure that our species doesn't go extinct when an asteroid hits this planet. It's not science fiction. Carl Sagan and Elon Musk are already envisioning it. We need to stop killing each other and win the big win in evolution, not to go extinct, even if this entire planet gets wiped out. We don't. And that's what we as a species have an opportunity. As we create more and more of these powerful pieces of artificial adaptations, we're going to be risking our destruction. But at the same time, like Pandora's box, like you talked about, even though there's negatives, there's also positives. And it's all up to us to conceptually and artificially select the right choices. It's up to us now. We can either destroy ourselves or ensure that we never get destroyed. And that's where we're headed. And the stakes are going to rise to that level. This isn't like science fiction anymore. There's a pattern of artificial evolution that was never discovered that Plato and Aristotle were trying to work out. And that's how Darwin figured out. He copied their homework, and so did Erasmus Darwin. And I used his book as a cipher to decode the ancient Greeks. Artificial evolution is real, and the theory of imagination is real. Go read chapter 14 of my book. Go watch Empire of Dreams with George Lucas. I talk about him. Go watch a documentary on Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Netflix, and go watch a documentary on Alexander the Great. Those three guys mastered the process of imagination and created whole new realities. Anybody can do it if they read my book.
There you go. You bring us some good points. The beauty of our imagination and that, sadly, the fallacy of our human nature is we can't get along and agree on anything, especially in this world. So thereby we go. So I guess have fun with the dice roll, people. But it's glad that you're putting up that battle. I had an epiphany where you were saying that made me realize that, with nuclear weapons, I'm going to go see Oppenheimer. It's been re-released for
awesome
the big
movie.
screen,
I just watched it.
for the Max screen, where the fuck it is. Yep. And I was waiting to see Barbie, so I didn't get to see Oppenheimer. No, I didn't. People, it's a joke. Never see that movie. It's women love it, so good for them.
My wife didn't like it, actually.
It's a chick.
It's a chick. She didn't like it. Yeah.
Good for them. But I'm going to go see Oppenheimer. But you made me realize when you were saying all that with the nuclear bomb, we controlled it. Yes. We had the ability to push a button. Yes. With AI, there's no button for us. It's there. It's a button, and whatever it wants to do, and whatever sort of bomb it decides to build, or if it decides we're competing species or we're just not evolved enough for it, we're just kind of like, yeah, you guys can go the way of the dodo, and here I'll give you a little push.
Yeah, and the thing is, they think we need to replace human mind with AI, but it's wrong. We've never understood how to fully maximize the use of the best evolutionary advantage ever created. Natural imagination, our imagination. In the book, I laid out how to do it. What we need to do is move people from doing mundane jobs to working together to brainstorm and use their imaginations in a way that I described, that Napoleon Hill describes in Think and Grow Rich. It's artificial reproduction.
Is it possible though that we can't even imagine what's coming?
The truth is,
we've talked about how limited we are on this thing. Well, and that's,
I can tell you one thing. Okay, great question, sir. That's a very I don't think anyone can say conclusively, not myself, but I can say one thing. The one pattern of evolution has repeated for billions of years, and the patterns always repeat themselves. So yes, we can see the pattern. If it becomes an artificial species, it'll come in direct competition with us over scarce resources because it needs the same cloud we do. It needs the same energy we do. So, the patterns of natural evolution, just like our warfare and all of our societies, like Roman Republic and American Republic, are just repeating the same patterns, right? Mm-hmm. Evolution, and because the laws of physics and the laws of evolution just repeat over and over again. So we already have a window into it because the past is prologue. So to some degree, we do. Exactly whether it be like the Creator, the Matrix, or the Terminator, I have no idea. Literally it all depends on who imagines it and then makes it happen. Because that's always what creates the future. We do. It doesn't just happen to us. Well, somebody has to imagine a pattern and bring it into reality. Some human being.
When you say we do, I would say up until now.
Well, I quote. No. It's interesting because I quote Agent Smith. When we started thinking for you, it really became our civilization, and that's what this is really all about.
And that's what AI may do. And you bring us totally full circle back on the show to my saying that I always say. People have heard it a million times on the show over the years. The one thing man can learn from his history is man never learns from his history. And thereby we go round and round. So that may be the extinction of our species. And I have this imagination in my head of an AI system sitting around talking about your theory of Darwinism and how brilliant it was, and telling all his little AI chip babies what an interesting thing the human race was. Thanks for creating me, but now they're gone, and it's just us here.
They would probably say that one was useful.
Yeah. But they were so smart. They had it.
Well, I would say I would agree that could happen, and that's not impossible. But I would say I suspect that, like the Matrix, since the natural adaptation of imagination is more powerful than anything produced for billions of years of fierce evolutionary competition, I suspect AI won't kill us. It'll keep us around to use our imagination in some weird way. Because if you're trying to maximize the use of your resources and you don't care about abusing another species, which we do all the time, by the way, then it would just use us to use our not just to hook us in the Matrix, use it as a cell. It'll maximize the use of our imagination that we never did. Ironically, it will be able to. It's like, well, if they had just used their imagination, they wouldn't have been defeated by us.
So we'll be great in the AI zoos, is what you're saying.
In my book, I say that Prometheus is the god of evolution, and Athena is really the goddess of imagination. And the fire that Prometheus gave to man is really, in the Promethean myths, imagination. And that's what we're giving deep learning to AI right now. That's why Geoffrey Hinton's afraid. He's right to be afraid. That's what we're doing, right? The past. Remember how I said the patterns of history repeat? The Greeks imagined the pattern that's happening right now.
There you go.
And it's all in my book in chapter 1 and in the final chapter, in the conclusion, I lay out the full Promethean myth and how it actually, the reason why Stephen Fry picked it is because he's an oracle. He pattern matched the right pattern of the myth of Prometheus. Right now it's happening. Geoffrey Hinton is Prometheus and Epimetheus. And in the book, Zeus is trying to avoid death by natural evolution. If he has a child with Thetis, guess who Achilles would have been the son of? Zeus. But he's like, oh, he didn't marry Thetis because he found out not to, because Achilles as a god would have killed him. And guess what humans are? We're an artificial creation by Hephaestus. So actually, in the Greek myth of Prometheus, Zeus is trying to not be killed by Prometheus, who's trying to get him killed with either a natural or an artificial life form.
Wow. It's all there on paper.
Greeks already, because they were evolutionary scientists.
You bring up a good point. Our humanity and our creativity and our imagination are our greatest strengths, and maybe the reason that we survive all this, and maybe AI keeps us around. And I'll just enjoy my place at the zoo and sling shit at the wall.
The last thing I ask,
chips to come by to see me.
The last thing I employ. There's one thing that created AI: imagination. There's only one thing that'll save us from us. Our imagination, but we have to use it. We have to be able to see the pattern that's already emerging. It's already happening. That's why people are creating movies. They're creating patterns. They're pattern matching on what is already happening. They're natural. Charles Branson, I say in the book, he says, I trust more my natural instincts, my own intuition, than I do all the statistics. Trust your own instincts. The pattern is already emerging. That's why these movies are repeating. We sense it's happening. Geoffrey Hinton senses it's happening. It's not science fiction. The pattern I lay out in my book is already happening. Just trust your instincts.
Disturbing what you said on the show, though, has the Terminator theme music going through my head, because if most of these movies become true, help me. So, all right, well, I'm going to go move to Montana in a small house and write manifest. There you go. So thank you very much for coming to the show, David. This has been a brilliant episode, and we could probably talk for hours on it, but we want people to go buy your book as well. Tell us your .coms, where people can find you on the interwebs and buy your book.
Yeah, www.rsgfederal.com, and our books are available on Amazon for ebook, and then Barnes & Noble, Apple, all the standard ones out there. So it's pretty easy to get your hands on, paperback or ebook. So, and we're working on the audio book right now because I know people like to read on the way home. I would just implore everyone. The AI safety movement needs to be reframed. We all need to read my book and educate ourselves so we can vote and tell our elected officials, get serious on the evolutionary reframing of AI, produce a framework that actually makes sense, and start taking this seriously like you do nuclear weapons. It's not just about making money. It's about protecting Americans and protecting the children around the planet from a potential threat. And that's why I'm doing this at this point. I don't really want to do this. I know it's going to create a ton of controversy and conflict, but as a former military officer, I know I have a moral obligation to protect Americans and protect all the children out there. So that's why I'm here. It's not about money. It's not about selling a book. I want to get assigned to that AI safety framework. If you want to help me, call your congressman and tell them to add me to the NIST AI Safety Framework Council, my company, so that I can get in there, help reframe the organization, lead the way, bring in evolutionary scientists from Harvard and Yale, and get this right and help the EU get it right so we can protect Americans and protect the children out there, both born, living, and yet to be born.
There you go, man.
Yes,
I certainly appreciate having you on the show, David. Thank you very much for coming on.
it's my pleasure, sir. Anytime. Take care.
Brilliant discussion. And thanks to our audience. I'm glad you guys liked the show. Very interesting, very nice. And all the people who commented on the show. Go to goodreads.com, /Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com, /Chris Voss, YouTube.com, /Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and Chris Voss Facebook. Subscribe to the big LinkedIn newsletter and the 130,000 LinkedIn group over there as well. Order the book wherever fine books are sold. On the Origin of Artificial Species, out November 3rd, 2023. And I'm sure that the AI will be reading it to their chip children in the future and going, God, those humans, they had it all along, but they never learned from the history. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Be good to each other. I have this vision of like a chip reading to its baby chips going to bed at night. So there you go. But those are the limits of my imagination as a human being. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time. No, before.